Okay, we are live. Yeah, thank you so much for joining in, guys. We'll just like give like everyone a minute to kind of like join in and tune in. Um, Also, just sharing the link just so that you guys can also like boost it up.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much for joining in, guys. It's been a long due conversation for us. We've been planning this one for quite a while.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the scheduling. I remember with ETC coming up and conferences, it was hard to get a hold.
It's been
But
great.
yeah, glad we made
Yeah.
it happen.
Yeah, awesome. I think like as we get started, maybe like a good way to get started is just like quick intros about all of you, and about the respective projects as well. Just like quick intro about myself. I'm Rishabh. I'm one of the co-founders of Socket, leading everything on the business side of things. I'll let VC, who's my other co-founder, kind of like introduce himself and Socket. But maybe Mirza, you want to like kick us off, and just introduce yourself and I think like everyone knows Injective, but the amazing work that you guys are doing at Injective.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So yeah, hi everyone. I'm Mirza. Have been running the business team at Injective for a little over 4 years now, which feels crazier every time I say it. But yeah, it's been a long time. Um, so Injective, on a high level, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is a layer one blockchain. It's a very specialized chain just for Web3 finance. What makes Injective very unique compared to other chains, in my opinion, is it provides you with a set of plug and play modules. You can almost think of this as a WordPress, where if you wanted to build a DEX or a lending protocol or an options protocol, you don't need to write the smart contracts from scratch. We sort of give you templates that allow you to get up and running very quickly. So yeah, that's how we've grown over the years, and that's what we plan on keep doing, sort of empowering developers to create unique and innovative financial apps very quickly. In terms of how I know Socket and Zion, I've known both of you forever. So I think I've known Zion for 4 years. And yeah, Socket I've known for at least three because yeah, I remember angeling like 2, 3 years ago now. So yeah, amazing progress on both fronts. I see both of you all over my Twitter all the time, and I'm very excited for the projects you guys are both building.
Yeah, you were one of our super early angels, I think, when we were doing very different things than what we are doing now. So it's been quite a journey, and yeah, I think Burnt, do you want to maybe introduce yourself and what you guys are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. What's going on, everyone? I'm the founder of Burnt. My name is Burnt Banksy. Got that name by lighting a Banksy on fire about 3 years ago. We're building Zion, which is a completely walletless L1 with the goal of chain abstraction, and hopefully working with Socket very, very closely. As you know, I think we are both really trying to lead this charge on chain abstraction, which for user adoption, there's no way we get user adoption without chain abstraction, and it's incredibly impressive to see VC, both you guys and everyone on the team, what you guys have done, and I'm extremely excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, VC, do you want to go next and take the baton?
Yeah, absolutely. It's nice to be having this conversation because, like, in some ways, I've like injected with or kind of like interacted with both Injective Labs and like Banksy 3 years back, right? Like, I think I was at Polygon back in the time when Injective was just getting started, and like, funny enough, like, I think a couple of people from the team were actually working from our office back then, so I got to kind of like see the early days. And Banksy, I definitely remember you burning that thing, and that being like the big moment. So glad to be on. I'm one of the founders here at Socket, mostly lead tech product engineering research, and I define Socket as the first chain abstraction protocol, which allows other protocols to kind of like become chain abstracted, right? And we've been kind of like operating Socket for the last couple of years. Uh, Kind of like having people move assets around, doing $2.5 billion every month at this point, and absolutely right what Banksy said. If we want to get to a billion users, we just cannot be bridging anymore. It absolutely sucks, and I've been doing that for the last 2 years. And speaking from experience, we need to do a lot better, and that's what Socket is trying to do now as the first chain abstraction protocol. Hope to kind of like double click on it. But yeah, Rishabh, Mike's back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. I think Just on this topic, right? I think like we spoke about Injective, and like I think like VC also mentioned about like Polygon and like the early days there, right? So, and especially like as like Injective also kind of came up like with this like Cosmos kind of background basically, right? Like developing on top of this, I think like the thesis across the board is like super. I think like it's forming much more and more clearly, which is like, hey, like we are having like more and more L1s and L2s and L3s that are like coming up so quickly. And what we're also seeing is specialization kind of like also come in. So for example, Injective kind of like specializing for finance, for example, right? Like we like, for example, there might be more chains who are like specializing, like app chains is like a ultra specialized version of things, right? So I think like just starting from the top, right? Where do you all think things are headed? Where are we like really headed into this like a future of like thousand chains? And if we do reach there, what really happens, right? So multiple questions within the same thing, but yeah, I think like just overview of how you guys are thinking about the space. Mirza, I think like if you also want to take
Yeah.
this on.
No, this is a fantastic question. So I think so. I have a nuanced take on this. So will there be thousands of chains? Probably yes, because it's easier than ever to create a chain. If you look at the Cosmos SDK, if you look at the OP stack, the Arbitrum stack, and many other chains are now creating these stacks, which basically allow you to launch a new chain even in a couple weeks. Which, if you asked me that a few years ago, that would sound crazy because launching a new chain would take years. You would have a white paper and then research for years and then finally launch a chain. So yeah, I think thousands of chains will exist. Now, whether or not like we need thousands of chains is a different question entirely. So yeah, maybe we can get into that a bit later, but I think they will exist. But I think what you'll start to see more and more is a shift away from generalized purpose chains. So I think there's more than enough general purpose chains, right? Like you have Ethereum, which it always will have a special place in my heart, but always also you had Solana and Aptos and Sui. You have all these different general purpose chains pretty much offering the same thing, like with a few different tweaks here and there on VM environment or how fast they are or how much the gas fees are. But I think specialization will need to happen because when you're an application developer, you have a custom set of needs beyond just being fast and cheap, right? Many chains provide you that today, but how do you really get to the next level? If you think of even generalized computing in Web 2, you have a lot of specialization, right? You don't have 50 different companies trying to make, I don't know, an OS, right? There's only like two real dominant OS systems. And then you have lots of other companies building specialized software for particular companies, whether it be, oh, here's like a special software or hardware just for gaming companies or just for enterprises, right? So I think you'll start to see more of that in crypto because initially you didn't have that specialization need because there's just a lack of apps, right? You just needed to have something that's kind of works for everyone. But now that you are starting to have these sophisticated applications, especially how Injective came to be, it basically said, oh, look, there's more than enough specialized chains. There's more than enough sort of general purpose chains. But how do you sort of create a chain for a sector? So not just one app or one particular like general purpose chain, but for a sector, which is hard, right? If you think of finance, it's such a broadly used term, but what you might need, like let's say it's an order book or binary options, or you might need a permission module so that enterprises can enter without like facing certain KYC hurdles. You can't really have that on a normal chain unless you're really focused on it. Because if you're a chain that's one day trying to do metaverse, one day trying to do NFTs and DeFi, it's not that you're not a good chain. You're just trying to you have to appeal to so many different sectors that it's really hard to hone in on the problems of one particular need. So that's how Injective sort of evolved over time in specializing in Web3 finance. So yeah, I do see the future evolving with thousands of chains. Now, how does that work in practice? I think Cosmos really led the way when it basically thought that this would happen in the future. Introp comes to mind, right? So I think Socket was doing amazing work with Introp, with the L2 environment, with the EVM environment initially. But now, and that's why I'm so excited for this panel today, sooner or later you get to a point where it's just so much hassle for the end user, right? You have like 50 different wrap versions of the same asset on 50 different chains, or you have different user IDs on every single chain. So what if we could abstract all of that away, and make it easier for users to enter no matter what chain they might be entering on. Like if I'm using an app on my MacBook, I should be able to use the same app if I open it up on a PC, right? Like the same website. It shouldn't matter that I'm using a PC or a Mac. So I think it sounds simple in nature, but it's so hard to do. But I'll sort of use that as a layup to you guys to talk about abstraction.
And I think if I can just interject, like the interesting thing, especially as we talk about chain abstraction, is there's so many different layers to this kind of stack. And I think the easiest way to define chain abstraction is actually just kind of the end all goal, right? Which is a user should never really interact with crypto. They should just use the application. Very similarly to how we're using StreamYard right now and people are listening, it shouldn't really matter. And I think with that being said, you have a lot of different kind of layers to this, right? You have the open marketplaces for like intent execution, right? And then you have this kind of account level, and then you have this blockchain level. And it's really awesome because I think for the first time in a very long time, actually, we've said the word composability and the word interoperability and actually meant it, because there's no way we could do all of this coordination by one person. And I think it's extremely awesome to see.
Yeah, just to kind of like finish that line of thought, or 100% agree. And like how I kind of like see this planning out is exactly how Mirza mentioned. Like the number of general purpose chains will be pretty small, and we will have these like I like to call them state bubbles. I don't like the name, but generally the idea is all sorts of like DeFi applications that depend on each other will sort of like collect under a single roof. All these sort of like NFT applications that absolutely need to share a server will kind of like collect under a single umbrella. But like we will have all of these kind of like independent applications having their own servers, L1s, L2s, L3s operating independently. And what modularization has enabled is like creating of these like layers, right? And I think two technologies, chain abstraction and restaking, are the ones that can like unify the stack completely, right? Such that users now don't have to think about, oh, am I interacting with like 100 layers? What are my security models, right? So I think modularization is like a horizontal technology, and like chain abstraction is like a vertical technology. I don't know if this analogy works, but visually, like that's how I think about this stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're right. And I guess the way that I kind of think about generalized layers kind of in the future is I think they're actually going to take the place of like a test net in a way, where I think we're going to get actually hyper efficient in building products for this industry. Ideally, we have generalized environments, which is, hey, here's a proof of concept. Let me deploy it quickly. It's working. It's picking up steam. Great. Now I'll then bring it to a specialized L2 to be able to specialize in the needs that I want to.
Yeah, and this is what we are already seeing, right? Like there are like so many applications, like Avo, for example, is some so they started as Ribbon Finance, and they kind of like like had their own application, I think, like on Ethereum, and like they quickly realized that, and like they had enough traction, moved away into their L2. I think like Lyra is another one, for example, who kind of like they all started in like, I think Lyra started with Optimism. They also expanded to Arbitrum, and now like they have their own chain, for example, right? So I think we're kind of like already seeing this trend, right? Like where it's like it's MVP basically, right? Like your MVP should not include you kind of like building the whole stack. You can just like like with the minimal effort, just like put it out there, test the demand, and kind of like then scale it up to millions of users basically. Um, a lot of interesting thoughts, by the way, from all of you, right? I think like I have like different things that I want to double click. I think the first thing maybe to get started is something what I think Mirza mentioned about like interop was like the first thing, right? And interop was like the first, I think, like obvious solution that was proposed. Hey, like let's just build bridges and connect all of these chains away. But I think like from what I understand is like that worked with when we had maybe 10 or 20 chains, right? But now as we kind of like go towards this hundred and thousands of chains, I think like interop kind of like is showing these kind of like limitations, right? Like token fragmentation is like one example. But yeah, maybe like I'll leave it to you guys to maybe like just double click on the kind of like problems that we're seeing overall, right? Like not just in Cosmos but also in Ethereum and like the broader space, right? VC, do you want to like start on this one?
Man, you're calling out the cross chain haters in the chat. But I think generally speaking, when we first started working on Socket, generally our idea was like, I've been building like chains and rollups for a while and had high degree of conviction that we'll have a lot of rollups. And was very clear to us that there is going to be a natural demand to kind of like comb these rollups or like combine these rollups back together. And obviously, like we've been taught since like 2017, 2016, interop is a thing, cross-chain is a thing, and you can like connect things, right? So connecting things is like the way everyone was kind of like bought up essentially in this industry, and that's what we kind of like went for. And things were like working quite well for a while. We were able to kind of like solve a lot of problems. But as like launching L2s and L3s became easier, a bunch of like fractures started popping up. And generally, like from my perspective, what I'm seeing is like connecting two chains is like good, important, but it's sort of like a dial up connection, which like works till like a certain stage. After a certain stage, people want a higher degree of abstraction. Uh, Now, when you kind of like interact with chain, you need to have gas. You need to have the gas token. You need to have the Vault RPC, stuff like that. And once an application itself is distributed over like 100 chains, this becomes like almost sort of like impossible. And this is what we saw on the data on chain as well, right? For every like 5 interactions, there was one sort of like bridging interaction, right? And these interactions took like X amount of minutes, X amount of dollars, and like people generally weren't liking the experience. So we started kind of like building out something we call MOFA, which is a modular order flow auction to kind of like address this thing, right? Like how do we get users and applications to build on chain without interacting with any of those block spaces directly, right? And that's what I think like broadly enables chain abstraction for us. Would be keen to hear like Banksy and Mirza, what do you guys think about this, and how has your experience been on this question?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for a lot of people who don't actually know, I was first building a DeFi marketplace on Solana, and I was trying to build a product in this industry, and effectively coming out of the Burnt Banksy things, trying to build a no-code product in this industry for people who weren't technically savvy to be able to use crypto. And this was, 2021. We kind of kicked that off about January, February. And then we were doing like 30,000 monthly active users, very solid. 5 of the top Solana collections came out of us. We were doing like a lot of much bigger projects, but the issue is, people needed to download a Phantom wallet, and then they needed to go to Coinbase, and then do the KYC, and then buy Solana, and then bridge it over via Wormhole, which just came out. And it was, for building no-code solutions, it was pointless, right? And you needed this certain level of technical knowledge, and that was exactly what we were trying to solve for, was people who didn't have technical knowledge. And so I would say, I think it was early 2022, we kind of sat down and we were like, effectively, we were just like, how can we solve this? Can we go to another chain and look for this? And we did our rounds, but, Terra was still alive at that point, and things like Polygon, et cetera, and you realize that a lot of these are just kind of on the foundational level issues. And so for us, we kind of looked at this aspect and said, okay, like, let's try to solve these issues like gas, like devices, like signatures, and how can we kind of solve this so that in a kind of build for your own style, anyone building a product doesn't have to do exactly what we do, and that's effectively how XION was created. And so I think everything that we do and everything that we've done with calling ourselves a walletless chain or going into the chain abstraction narrative, it's building, having the tools that we built for ourselves and then being able to provide to them after. And I think only then, once we get this Web2 experience and like the total addressable market of a crypto product isn't that of MetaMask or Coinbase, then we actually can start to see genuine usage. And we have this interesting chicken and egg problem in this industry where there's no products because there's no users, and there's no users because there's no products. And I think one of these needs to be a catalyst. And I think chain abstraction genuinely is this catalyst, because now we can start basing things not necessarily off of like transaction size, but just pure volume, and actually be a global economy like crypto promises.
Yeah, no, agreed on all fronts with both of you. I'll just give a little bit of historical context for like 30 seconds on why bridging and interop is super important for us. So Injective back in the day, back in 2018, actually started as an Ethereum native project. And then we obviously faced constraints. I won't bore you with the details. So we moved on over to the Cosmos SDK to build a sort of specialized custom chain. But we always had a special place in our hearts for Ethereum, right? Because we realized like all liquidity, all users were on Ethereum. We wanted to bring those users over. Problem was at that time, it was really hard for Cosmos users to interact with Ethereum in any way. So many people don't know this, but Injective ended up building the real first bridge to Ethereum for the Cosmos ecosystem. And that took a long time. It took a year for us to build. And we needed to think of a lot of other things that go along with it. Bridging is not as simple as creating a bridge, right? A big part of that is wallet access. So how do you sort of bridge assets when MetaMask can't be used on a Cosmos chain? So we had to work on that. How do you sort of attest different assets when they're bridged over? We had to account for that. When L2s came out, how do you deal with different wrap versions of the same asset? If it comes from Optimism or it comes from Arbitrum versus Ethereum, it's technically a different version of the same asset. And finally, like security and timing, right? Like how do you ensure that there's security? Because 90% plus of bridges have had some security vulnerability, no matter how big they are, right? Which is very scary for end users, right? And finally, the timing part, right? It you can't create an actual financial network, which was really our focus, if it takes 20 minutes for a transaction to come through, right? And that was no fault of our own. Many people have tried to speed up bridges. IBC is super fast, but the problem with IBC is it only really works for Cosmos chains today. Sure, it's fast, but what if I want to access an asset from Scroll or another sort of L2? It would still take like 20 minutes because it on some L2s it even takes 7 days just to withdraw an asset. How can you really you can use buzzwords like composability or like DeFi, but you can't really have DeFi or composability if it takes you like several days to access an asset, right? So these are my personal gripes with bridging. Many people have tried to fix some of these issues, but I think the way we're approaching it now, or how the industry shifted because of guys like Burnt, guys like Socket, is we're realizing like bridging might no longer be needed in general. Like we can abstract that process away, because that's really what the end user wants. The end user doesn't care about like accessing an asset from Scroll or Optimism or even Injective. They just care about accessing an asset, no matter where it comes from, and they want access to certain applications. They don't necessarily care what chain it sits on. Just like I don't really care that the Telegram app I'm accessing is on my iPhone. Like I could have accessed that on my Android as well. It doesn't matter. So abstraction really allows the end user apps to truly shine. And right now we've just added so much complexity. And I think this is due to just how crypto started. We started as sort of this theoretical research-based industry, and everyone's so technical, and we just think everyone's going to get it. This is no fault of crypto. I think this is how new technologies just come to be, right? If you think about like early stage of computing or anything else, it was always more technical. I love VC's example of like dial-up. I remember like when I was a kid, like having to take the phone line, putting it into my computer to like access the internet. That's crazy. That's kind of like bridging today, honestly. So I would love to have sort of Wi-Fi and all these other ways to access the internet. And that's really what abstraction comes to be. So that's my little take on introp and bridging and our experience with it.
Yeah. Also, it reminds me of another analogy that kind of like we put out, and I think like you also referred to in the last question, I think, right, Mirza, where when you're like using Netflix, right, you have the same account for your iOS device, for your TV, for your PC, every device that you can think of, right? Like you have like one common account, and then you can access the same content for all these devices, for example, right? Like so you could watch half a movie on PC and then go and like continue watching the same movie and access everything, all the same functionality on your TV from there, right? And things does not change. The experience does not change, right? It's just Netflix. The device that you might be accessing Netflix on kind of like might change, right? And that's like the higher level of abstraction that ultimately that we're trying to achieve here, right? Like it's not that, hey, like you have like one account here and then like you need another account for like what, like just think about like paying $5 for every device that you want to kind of like watch Netflix on, right? And that's kind of like the state of crypto now, right? Like where everywhere you need like gas and these assets, and now you just have like this one application basically that you're really going and like using, right? So I think with that in mind, Um, Another thing that I wanted to ask you guys was, I think when people think about chain abstraction, the most common way to talk about, and something that we've also been talking about, is like a user lens, right? Like where, hey, like the complexities from users should be abstracted away, and like everything like that. But I think like the real audience in crypto is developers, right? Like, so what do you guys think are like, one, like the problems that chain abstractions can solve for developers, or like the benefits that these developers can reap in once, like we are in like this chain abstracted world. Burnt, maybe do you want to like take this on?
I mean, I think the biggest is just users, right? It is you have I think the fall off rate is about 90% when someone's prompted with a wallet. Um, it's terrible. Like we have adoption rates that mimic the internet, and the internet required hardware to implement. The fact that we're at the same implementation level of hardware is terrible. And you could say tech bubble, but the fact of the matter is it's way too slow for things that are already in place and completely unnecessary. So, I mean, first and foremost, it is a total addressable market that's huge. And then I think with that come extreme network effects that you get. You can kind of see these little blobs popping up within this kind of insular crypto that we have. But then, I mean, I would be willing to bet that there's probably less than 1 million true users in this industry in total. Um, and then, so I think if we can bring that to 2 million users, that is doubling the amount of users of this industry. And there's 7 billion people in the world. Given the fact that we're trying to make, and not even trying, like we very succeeded in making this kind of global economy that's not global, right? And so we fix the part of distribute. We just need to fix the part of distribution, and I think the real benefit to that is sustainable business models, sustainable businesses, and products that provide value. Then and it's like it's interesting because we've been in this industry that's been verify, don't trust, but I think from an application and product level, it's been trust, don't verify, because there's not too much out here.
Yeah, we see. Would
I'll,
love to.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll absolutely double click on that one, man. It's super frustrating, and it's very clear no one's tracking their retention rates in crypto, and we are all kind of like PvPing amongst ourselves when we really need to be thinking about like Web3 versus like the world out there, right? You land on a DApp and they ask you, oh, which one of these 100 wallets do you have? Uh, does this thing work with EIP 1271 or like whatever, right? And that's where like users are like, what the fuck does that even mean? I just wanted to get some like shitcoin, right?
I don't care if it's fungible or not, whatever.
Exactly. Are you trying to buy a non-fungible token? Man, like first time I heard
Sorry,
that word, I had
go
to
to the
Google
other
it.
marketplace. That's not us. We don't do that here.
Yeah, the state of crypto is like hilarious at the moment, and we are trying to fix it. With like more builders coming in every bull market, like things are definitely improving. I absolutely lost track of what the actual question was. Wait, it's coming back. I think it was about devs, right? Generally speaking, like where my thoughts are is with the state bubble stuff, right? Where like Injective is the DeFi chain. There is probably like an NFT chain out there. There's probably some other chain where a certain sort of like applications are. One application for the end user is going to interact with a bunch of these things internally, right? Like probably if you're building like an NFT application, you need some place to kind of like trade those NFTs, right? And you want this place to be somewhere where NFT buyers and liquidity already exist. If you're building this sort of like NFT application, you probably want a cheap compute chain, something that's like highly parallelized or something like that, and you'll deploy on like one of these kind of like VMs. You will probably need like some sort of like staking liquidity to have your NFT holders actually hold, right? So my point is like an application is going to be a collective of like these individual specialized chains, and that's what chain abstraction will enable them to do, right? Like right now, because like we don't have like chain abstraction tech, everyone's kind of like forced to generalize chains, versus like now that we have like modularity and chain abstraction, everyone like chains can be specialized and applications can be like generalized, right? And they don't have to worry about, oh, what chain is this kind of like specifically using? Do I need to go to that chain, buy that like gas token? Uh, and this will kind of like encourage these chains to also specialize, which I think Injective like always has like front run the industry in general. What do you think, Mirza, about this? Do you think about devs on your end? How do you think about those?
Yeah, no, we think about it a lot, of course. It's like because we're constantly trying to create a tool set that developers can use to build applications, right? I think it's simpler than we're making it out to be, and I agree with you both. Devs ultimately, if they're application developers, just care about who's going to use this thing in the end and how easy can we make it for those users, right? Because the more users they get, the more successful usually that product is. So I would obviously I cannot speak to every developer, but I would assume 90% plus of developers care just mainly about how many users they can get and um, how many people put revenue or users through this application. So the easier you can make that process, the better. For me, this is very deep because that's exactly what Injective wanted to do. It's like, hey, it takes years to build any of these applications and they're great. How can we make it so that it's faster for them to create it? That's why we created all these modules. So if you want to launch a DEX or a lending protocol or a prediction market, betting on the election, you can do that in the matter of days instead of it taking months or years. Abstraction just takes that to the next level, right? Because if you really think about it, yes, as a developer or us who are so entrenched in the industry, we've all been here for many, many years. For us, it's very easy to grasp all these things. It's like, oh yeah, like that's wrapped deep. That's coming from this chain, or like, oh, this is what intent means. But if you ask any average user, they have no idea, right? Like what that even means. So I almost find it ironic that we as an industry constantly talk about like how we're trying to democratize the world and how we're trying to bring like I don't know this new economy to users worldwide when only the top 1% of the 1% of like people who know about the industry even understand what this industry is about or what it means, right? So it's actually sometimes funny that I think about that projects like XION and Socket, it took us so long to get there or for the industry to finally realize like, hey, this is needed, chain abstraction is needed. I think only in the last few months, believe it or not, have people really started talking about chain abstraction. Like I think this was needed like years and years ago. Whereas like instead of us constantly innovating on new tech stacks or infra, which is important, it's good. But yeah, to Burnt's point and to your point earlier, we barely have users in this industry, right? Like yeah, I would double down on that. I think we barely have 1 million users in DeFi today, right? Which is problematic because it's existed for so many years now. Any new app like you create, you could have literally made Flappy Bird, which probably took like 2 seconds to make, and that had millions and millions of users in like a day. So if we as an industry like can't even get 1 million users, and apparently we're all worth trillions of dollars, like right, this industry is worth trillions of dollars. That makes no sense to me. So I think this is like going to unlock massive value for the ecosystem and finally allow us to like get to mass adoption. I know it's been a meme for years, but we will finally get there if we have easy logins, easy wallet access, like without having to know all these technical jargon and terms. It seems very simple, but it's obviously very hard to build. So yeah, no, agreed on all fronts with both of you.
The institutions are coming.
Yes. No, they probably are. I feel like, yeah. Honestly, I think institutions will come earlier than mass adoption of retail at this point because, like, with the ETFs and how they're able to engage, they're just inherently going to be a bit more savvy than your average retail user. Like, your average retail user who just knows like applications or is just using Cash App or Venmo is going to have a much harder time grasping crypto than like probably an analyst at Goldman Sachs who has like a master's degree, right? It's probably going to be a little easier for that guy. So yeah, which is ironic because there are barely any institutions in the space today. So imagine how little retail there is.
Yeah. But the thing is, like, institutions or like these analysts are also struggling to kind of like get a sense of these things, right? So that's the level of complexity that we're kind of like dealing with, that these institutions or like, like these, like, let's say top of the world people are also kind of like struggling to get like a hang of, okay, how do I use everything here, right? Which is crazy. But yeah, I think like just to summarize, and like this is something that kind of like also came up in like our last few conversations. So, for example, when we were chatting with Celestia, like we had Nick, and he kind of like described chain abstraction in one word as like build wherever, for example, right? Which is, for example, what you guys refer to, where hey, like as a developer, you just build on Injective. If you're building a finance app, you build on, you can also like customize, hey, like between SVVM or SVM, or like in VM, and kind of like have like any kind of like customization in your stack as much as possible to build the best app. And then this is the other conversation we had with Kane from Infinix was, hey, like we need to think a lot about user flows. We need to think a lot about getting these users, making everything super usable and kind of like super intuitive, for people to like really be able to like expose themselves to all of the amazing innovation that's happening in this space, and not just after um, and not just like like the speculation use cases. But yeah, I think um, last I think like just on top of that, I think one thing that people think a lot also is chain abstract. How do like what is the relationship between chain abstraction and chains, right? From like a very intuitive standpoint, it just seems like from a very naive point of view is like, hey, like it's not in favor of chains to have chain abstraction. It might actually decrease their value, for example. While it's like a huge misconception, it actually increases their value, right? But how do you guys think about the relationship between chain and chain abstraction, and yeah, and like the value, what kind of like value do these two projects kind of like bring together? uh,
I could probably take this because even as we worked with, we did a chain abstraction demo with Injective, and it's very interesting because I think it's, especially when you have like this 1-to-1 ratio, it's a transaction on one account, transaction on another account, gas fee on one account, gas fee on one account. Um, um, you know, but then when you bring that over to, not a 1-to-1 ratio, like or 1-to-n ratio, but rather an n-to-n ratio, it's this kind of omni transaction kind of aspect where everything for everyone is beneficial. And I think for the first time you kind of see this L1s working with L1s because we both get what we want at the end of the day, right? We get the user, we get the transaction, we get the attention, right? And I think at the end of the day, it's like, because it's not, I think we've lost the point in the industry where everything is going to be sticky, and there's going to be these moats. And I just think if there was a point for Ethereum to be the leader, it would have been defined 4 years ago. And I think we're way past that point where we're tribalist. And, especially if you want to survive as a new L1 or in for a project, there's no way that you can be tribalist and you can be insular. You need to be, you need to adapt to kind of this new method, right? And it's great because this is what we've been preaching the entire time, where now we actually have now we actually have composability on an omni-chain level, where everyone wins and the only way you lose is trying to hold on to like the past.
yeah, Mirza, would love to get your thoughts on
Yeah,
this
yeah.
as well.
I mean, agreed. So there are 2 points I want to refer back to. So the first one was mentioned by VC, I think, like a couple minutes ago, where he said the industry is very PvP, right? Like most chains, most protocols are so PvP, but that's been detrimental to the industry in general, right? Like what you have is not like real usage, but rotators. You see this in a very perverse way with airdrops and farming in general, like where people will like farm on ZK Sync one day. After they get the airdrop, they'll move on to Scroll or another chain. Everything is PvP, from like airdrops to like how people interact with apps, how, yeah, like, and what Burnt was saying, like how tribalist everything is. But I think it is truly a misconception that chain abstraction is bad for the chain or the space, right? Because it's kind of cliche or cheesy to say, but in my opinion, chain abstraction is almost like 1+1 = 3. So the synergy is just way better, right? So who cares if another person thrives with you if you inherently are getting more users, more usage? Because what we've done as an industry is really optimize the infra stack, which is great, but most block space today is not even utilized. Like there's no real usage of any of this additional block space that we've enabled with L2s, with all of these like alt L1s that are so highly performant. Chain abstraction really fixes this problem, in my opinion. It's like, okay, let's create the easiest pathways for users to access the chains or the applications on these chains, instead of them being like no man's land on their own little island. So yeah, no, I think like anyone who thinks chain abstraction or abstraction in general is not going to help the chain or the end users or the applications is just like flatly wrong. Because I think the only way for the industry to grow is to stop the PvP mentality and just realize like, hey, we don't really have many users. We need to work together as an industry to get these users onboarded. So let's do that together as all of these different chains.
100%. Yeah, I don't have like too much to say here. Mirza and Bond covered like pretty much everything. I just have this thing where, there is this meme where like other chains don't matter, your chain is perfect. Chain abstraction does that to your chain. So if you think chain abstraction is like cannibalistic, look at it from this perspective, right? It makes and especially in this world where everyone is building like an app chain, and like that's likely going to be a thing for a bunch of these apps, that you're going to have your own L2, L1, L3. This is the perspective you should be looking at things with, right? Like if you are opening an island, you want as many kind of like connections, you want as much composability as possible, because that's essentially the trade-off you're making when you kind of like go and launch your own island. You are taking this trade-off that I'm not going to be part of the mainland, I'm going to be this like separate thing. And now your number one goal is to actually kind of like connect and kind of like compose with as many things outside of your island as possible in like as seamless way as possible. And that's what like chain abstraction does for you.
Awesome. Yeah, I think like on this note, we have like a great question from like some folks in the audience as well. So, what's the best way to abstract chains? Intent protocol, bridges that support all chains, a new chain which talks to all chains. So, yeah, I leave it up to you guys. Like, who wants to go first and take this on?
I mean, I don't know if there's a. I really don't know if there's a best way to abstract chains. I think there's, intent protocols is one layer of it, right? And I think it is, you got like the cake framework out there, and you have a lot of frameworks out there to think about it. But I think obviously, like, I mean, intent was one of those things that felt super super obvious, which is like you're telling me the latest hype thing in this industry is saying, hey, I want to do something, and then doing it. But then moving to a level of like, unfortunately that's where we were, right? But the perfect way to abstract chains is to kind of work with a lot of other these people like Socket, like us, etc., and then work with the applications, work with the L1s, and create experiences that people actually want, and then market to people who actually need it. And so I think it's definitely more of a it's probably more of a social rather than technical issue, because I believe all the tools for chain abstraction, if they're not already there, they'll be here by the end of the year. But you're just ideally next year you're never going to see, hopefully you just never you could think you're interacting with a web 2 product. And I think the way to do that is, of course, just like there's a social element and there's a functional element, and thankfully the functional element's pretty much there.
Yeah, only one thing I'll add to what Bernd said, like absolutely correct. I think a lot of things are lost in the word chain abstraction because people just think it's one thing. But what people don't realize, like it refers to many, many different little layers in between. So wallets need to be abstracted. The bridging process needs to be abstracted. How you actually interact with the app needs to be abstracted. Wrapped assets need to be abstracted. So I know Zion's been working on this. I know Socket's been working on this. So you guys are the vertical experts. But I think for an end user, it's important to understand that chain abstraction doesn't just mean abstracting away to the chain. It means abstracting away every little element that might have served as an obstacle to you accessing products or applications. So yeah, there's never going to be just one solution. I think everyone needs to be on the same page. Like we need Phantom and MetaMask and the chains themselves and the apps to all coalesce and say like, no, we're going to abstract all of the complexities and jargon away.
Even even the question itself is quite hilarious, like intent, bridging protocols, and like a chain of chain, like all of these are like such like buzzwords and jargons. Like honestly, like when I see like a bunch of attempts in the space to kind of like define chain abstraction, I almost think like, that's like anti of what we should be doing here. We should be like shipping it. It's like really hard to kind of like define it and kind of like I think what happens in the space, like you give something a definition, someone else pops up, oh no, it's the wrong definition, and energy kind of like gets spent on like arguing about semantics, definitions, EIPs, versus like it's literally a bunch of like stitching work that we need to be doing here. We have like a bunch of these tools. We need to kind of like stitch them together and have this like chain abstraction dream possible.
Yeah, we definitely don't want to start like L2 definition debate here, which has been, I don't know, going on for so many years. But yeah, um, yeah, awesome. Yeah, I think like thank you so much for all the thoughts, guys. I think like we'll kind of like stop the questions here for now. But it was a wonderful chat having all of you here. We are looking forward to the next one. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and yeah, we'll see you all soon.
Thank you so much.
Everyone, thank you so much.
Bye, guys.